Welcome to my channel. In this tutorial, I will show you how to digitize data collected from a delicate historical garment. These scans and images of patterns, textures, and construction details will then be ready to integrate in Clo to create a digital twin. Check out my other videos in the series for more information on creating digital twins of historical garments, and follow my Patreon in the description below for additional support. Let's get started. All right, the first thing that I'm showing you how to digitize is the surface details of the garment. So in this case, this is this imprint/embroidery on the back of this robe. It could also be smaller embroidery pieces, or if it's an all-over print garment, it could be the print part of that. We're not really interested necessarily in the texture of the fabric itself, but any sort of top application that has been placed over that we want to recreate in Clo that we will not be able to find any other place. So the first thing you really need to do here is arrange this so that the graphic is flat on the table as best as possible. Now this robe was really difficult to lay flat because of how it's sewn. You can see I did not worry about this corner here or even up here. There's no more pattern repeat beyond this point up here. So I really was only focused on getting one repeat of this floral pattern in the shot. So that would be like this flower and then this flower. Those are that's a full repeat horizontally, and then vertically I just had to make sure I got this entire height because there really is no vertical repeat. This little bottom part here happens once and then that's it. So there is no repeat on the y-axis, but I can see the repeat on the x-axis, and I did get that fully in place. You'll also notice that because this fabric is sheer, I did place some paper underneath. It was nice because I was able to open up this robe so that I wouldn't be getting, more of that pattern kind of conflicting in the back. Sometimes if you have like a lace dress that's sheer, you really need to just see one side of that lace at the time. So putting in some paper or whatever to, so that you only see one layer at a time is helpful. And then just like we did when we were tracing the pattern, I smoothed this out so it's perfectly on grain, and it's as square as I could possibly get it to be. So that means because this was a woven, I was gently brushing in opposite directions on the x-axis and the y-axis because that is the direction of the grain. So then, in order to take the photograph, I had to stand completely above the garment. I really don't want perspective in this image, so I'm trying to reduce that as much as possible. And I was just like on a ladder next to the table with my phone facing straight down. Also notice that I tried to get an even lit surface. It's not great lighting, and there is some, maybe some iffiness on the color that I need to maybe correct, but it is evenly lit. So this side isn't in shadow, and while this side is more lit, and that's going to help retain just kind of that evenness in the finished digital garment. When I took this picture, I did take it on this gridded background, and that's going to be really important for this next step. If you don't have a full, gridded table like I do, even just taking it on something that is square, like a square table where you capture the edges of the table, will also work just fine. It is helpful though to have some sort of grid in the picture for scale for later. And then the last thing is, as you stand over your garment, try to avoid casting your own shadow over. Thankfully, I have a light directly above this that it was fine, but that's another thing to look out for. I also just want to say that this photo is great, but I am missing a lot of this beautiful detail in this embroidery. I have another image here that I took closer to get more of that detail, And let's see, this one as well, getting some of that for reference as well. This won't be useful for necessarily tracing, but for just myself knowing what this texture actually is. Isn't that so beautiful? That's really important. This one's a little bit closer too, so getting a few more close-up pictures, even if you're not capturing the entire pattern, can be useful later on. Okay, so the next thing that you need to do, this photo is not ready to be used in Clo yet. It's not fully digitized because it needs to be now squared, so that we need to reduce distortion as much as possible, which is why we have it on this gridded background. So I actually can do this on my phone when I take a picture. I use Microsoft Lens, and it's kind of like a scanning app. So I can just do this in my phone directly, which is what I usually do. I know some iPhones just have this in their photo app, so that's fine too. But I'm just going to show you in Photoshop how to then square this image as much as possible. So I'm going to the perspective crop tool. If I click and hold the crop tool, it's perspective crop tool. And again, most apps can do this, but the key that you want, usually when you crop something, it's going to be a square no matter what. Maybe you can rotate it. But the perspective crop tool, you can actually control all four corners individually. And so I'm actually just following on the grid, making sure I'm clicking square on the grid, even if it's not square yet. So, this is lined up there. It's not skewed like that. These are all perfectly lined up on the grid. And once that's done, I can kind of also, check this in different places as well. I don't want to crop out all of these squares entirely. It's helpful to keep them for later on because they will show me scale, but I can go ahead and press enter. And this is pretty much now as scanned as it's going to be. So there's not perspective here. There's a little bit of warping, maybe a little bit, but it's pretty close. And I can check it by just going to like any ellipse or any rectangle marquee tool and finding another like square point on, every time I draw a square, no matter what, it's lining up to the grid. So that's a way to conveniently check my work. Sometimes even if you have like paper in here and it's flat, you can kind of square it up like that too. Okay, so that's how we like scan the texture for later. It's without perspective, it won't fit in a scanner, so this is about the best that we can do. We're going to do the same thing on the patterns that we took in the previous video. So this is a pattern piece here. It's a square. These little squigglies are my tracings of this exact actual flowers. Can't you tell? It looks so good. Actually, I think this is upside down because that looks like the little arch there. So because this paper is so fine, I put it on a darker paper so I could see the edges. I cut out along the outside of that square. And then I put it on the same gridded table, making sure I could still see some of the grid when I put this darker paper down. Again, I stood as on top of this as I possibly could, trying to reduce distortion, keeping the gridded background, not casting a shadow, although the shadow's not as important in this case. Going to that perspective crop tool again, and I'm just going to, grab some of these points here. And at the edge of the table here, my grid starts to curl up, so I might actually just grab a different square here. It might be a little bit more accurate. And again, keeping those squares for scale, and that looks pretty good. Go ahead and press enter, and let's see how square this is. All right, that's not too bad. This might not be perfectly squared. Actually, look at that. That actually lines up pretty nicely. So my square that exists in real life is now square in the computer, and we have successfully digitized this pattern. All right, my last note on digitizing is, oftentimes we only have a limited amount of time to spend with a garment, so we want to take detailed shots. I showed you these just of this beautiful embroidery / print combo here. This one as well. I also took detailed shots of this smocking. really any sort of detail like stitching, seam finishes, hem finishes, interior construction, closures, decorations like buckles, all those things. You want to get some really good pictures, even better if you can kind of get some grit in there for scale. So I took all three of these are the smocking, and then I took this detail of this really poorly treated um, stitching job here. Some of the fraying detail. I was trying to capture some of like the folded edge. Also, you can kind of see how this is bagged out. All of the seams in this garment are beautifully encased. You can kind of see some of the silk kind of shredding. This is the edge of that seam allowance in there. Some more of that. So this is me getting images of the seams. I'm also interested here as well as the close-ups of the texture of the fabric in case I need references for later, like this beautiful, look at that. Look at that. My phone did a great job. This kind of, you can see the twist here. There's like, it's like a little bit more of like a Georgette type sheer. And then this satin, that'll be really helpful for finding images, or sorry, for finding digital fabrics that will work here. And I can link more on where I like to find my digital fabrics later. Here's a close-up of this bow on the inside and on the outside, because I think this bow is going to be really tricky to try and remake in clo. And I realize now that I didn't actually measure out kind of where these pleats are and how this is kind of pleated and folded up in here. So I'm glad I have these pictures in case I didn't have access to this garment again, for that reference. Yeah, how this bow works, how it's tacked, and things like that. So again, if you have limited time with a garment, getting these types of detailed shots, I have a checklist that I follow just to make sure I have everything. And that's shared on my Patreon. And yeah, that's really all I wanted to show you. Now all of this is in the computer. We're done with the garment and we're ready to start building everything in clo. And I hope you join me in the upcoming videos, and we'll see you there.